Palestinian feminist activist, artist, and social entrepreneur. Yasmeen is a graduate of UNC Greensboro and grew up living between North Carolina and spending summers in her family's home in Tubas, Palestine. As an adult, she moved to Ramallah, where she launched her clothing company Baby Fist last August. Through her designs, she reappropriates catcalls such as Habibti, which means my dear, and turns them into statements of empowerment. The jacket that started it all had "Not Your Habibti" painted on the back, a statement which negates the ownership implied in the word Habibti and asserts the wearer's control over her own body. All of the material for her clothing is sourced from the Palestinian territories. The product is made by women in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and 10% of her proceeds are donated to the Palestine Working Women's Society for Development. She has accomplished all this and is only 21 years old. Additionally, last year in East Palestine, I know, we're all wondering what we're doing. Additionally, last year in East Palestine, Yasmeen took a stand against street harassment by sitting on the campus of Al-Quds College and inviting women to share their experiences with her. She recorded their stories using an Israeli Defense Forces typewriter, typically used to type up Palestinian identity cards and travel permits, as a commentary on who controls space. Her unique project intersects performance art and social advocacy, gender justice, and liberation in Palestine. Tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. in Collis, Dartmouth's campus will have the opportunity to contribute to the Not Your Habibti typewriter project. During her U.S. tour, Yasmeen will also be visiting Harvard, Boston College, Wellesley, Brown, Tulane, and Emory.
Okay, I'm Sumner. Today we're excited to have Yasmeen discuss her experiences as an Arab American woman in both the United States and Palestine, her perspectives on Arab feminism, and the inspirations behind her social entrepreneurship and activism. Her perspective is intersectional and nuanced, and we hope it will inform and enrich our conversations about gender justice, sexual assault and harassment, and social justice at Dartmouth. She has and continues to inspire us, so please join us in giving her a warm welcome.
Hi, thank you for the warm welcome. I see I've got some Baby Fist supporters in the audience. Thank you for the love and support. And thank you to Sumner and Sheridan, who worked really hard to bring me here. It's an honor. Okay. I was about 7 or 8 when I started seeing the images of occupied Palestine. My mom was very involved in our Palestinian community in North Carolina, so she was always taking my siblings and I to fundraisers and protests. I remember seeing an image of a bloodied child laying limp in the arms of a crying man. I knew that this was Palestine and that everyone was angry. I didn't know why we were angry, we just were. I was aware of the fact that there was this thing called occupation and that it was a big deal. I just didn't understand the intricacies of it. One thing I knew for sure was that the Palestine I was seeing in these awareness pamphlets and posters wasn't the Palestine I had been seeing every summer since I was born. My parents made sure to keep us far away from violence as possible when visiting. My Texas house in our village had a garden full of roses, and there was a sweet shop down the street where all the children spent their Eid money. Palestine was made up of relatives and games with the neighborhood kids. It was grape leaves stuffed with rice and fresh watermelon on a hot day. I loved it. But things were different once summer ended and we headed back to North Carolina for the start of the school year. I remember in 3rd grade, we had snack time built into our daily schedule. And one day my mom packed me a Ziploc bag full of pomegranate, and I pulled it out in the midst of kids pulling out Nutter Butters and Doritos. And one girl at my table asked what I had, gave me a funny look, and told me it was weird. I didn't finish my snack that day. And sometimes during snack time and lunch, I couldn't eat anything because I was fasting for Ramadan. But of course, I was the only one, and as a 3rd grader, I wasn't exactly being celebrated for being different. Coming back from Christmas break each year was the worst, because we always had to write down what we did and got for Christmas, and I never knew what to write. I knew that the other kids celebrated Christmas, and I didn't, but I didn't know why. And being isolated and misunderstood in elementary school, I suddenly started to really dislike my Palestinian side. And it only got worse as I got older. As a child, it never dawned on me that my brother and I would have different opportunities in the world. that I would be restricted from things that he didn't even have to ask about. I was never allowed to have guy friends, well, my parents never asked who his friends even were. He could stay out as late as he wanted, while I had to be home by 9. He could join the soccer team, and I couldn't. But that didn't mean I could be a cheerleader. I would live under my dad's authority before being passed on to my husband's. And whenever I asked why, my parents told me because we're Arab. So I hated Arab culture. I rejected every aspect of Arab and Palestinian identity. I refused to eat Palestinian cuisine. I felt bad for the girls wearing hijab. I pushed the Arabic language from my brain and refused to learn it. If Arab culture and Islam were patriarchy, then I wanted nothing to do with it. I was an angry teenager. I yelled a lot, I threw fits, I cried, locked myself in my room. No one understood me. Hell, I didn't even understand me. And for years, I was angry that no one could tell me who I was in the world. If you had told my 14-year-old self that one day, as a young woman, she would be an avid feminist and women's rights activist, she probably would have cried with joy. In all realness, I probably would have asked what it was, and then I would have cried. My relationship with feminism, in which I actually understand and defend it, is a new one, like in the last year type of new. And needless to say, my feminist awakening happened very late on in life. Growing up was so tumultuous and confusing for me because I was constantly fighting with my parents and a larger culture that I felt were violating my feminist beliefs, even if I couldn't quite put it that way yet. In hindsight, my perpetually angry teenage self was troubled because of gender-based issues and discrimination. My life as an Arab woman was already defined for me from the moment I was born. And the catch was that no one had ever sat me down and told me the things that I was allowed to do and forbidden from. So I would only get in trouble after I had unknowingly done something in violation of these unspoken societal norms for Muslim Arab women. My parents had told me that I was a Muslim and an Arab, but I never really understood what those things meant, and I didn't understand that they came with rules. And I sure as hell didn't understand that those rules were misconceptions, misinterpretations of what was actually a really beautiful thing. And while those misconceptions and misinterpretations were shaping me, it wasn't obvious they were shaping me. I was raised in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I went to a school system that was 96% white. When I was in middle school, I remember one time being in the back of a car with some of my friends. And one of my friend's moms was driving us to a movie, and I was telling a story. In the middle of the story, I called myself a white girl. And the mom must have been listening because she turned around and told me, "Honey, you're not white." And I was stunned into silence. I brushed it off, finished my story, and never thought about it again. Fast forward a few years, I'm in 12th grade, a senior at my 96% white high school. I was taking a European history class taught by Mr. Thompson, an eccentric and very, very honest man. One day I walked into class and he gave me a funny look and asked why I straightened my hair every day. Immediately self-conscious, I asked why it was a problem. And he goes, "Why are you trying to be white?" And there it was again. For the second time in my life, someone was telling me what I wasn't. Fast forward again. I've just graduated from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I was moving to Palestine in just 2 weeks. I got to Ramallah, the de facto capital of Palestine, and I was in a wonderland. The architecture, the markets, the land, the people. Even though I had been visiting Palestine every summer for 20 years, it was exhilarating this time around in a way that had never been before. And I wanted to learn everything, to know everyone. I talked to shop owners, taxi cab drivers, and waiters. I had a smile to give, a how are you to ask, and a conversation to have with everyone. Without realizing it, I had been raised a true Southerner. And pretty quickly, this dawned on me in a really tragic way. Every time I got into a cab, the driver would ask where I was from. And every time I responded, Palestine. And they were skeptical. They told me I didn't seem Palestinian. Again, someone was telling me what I wasn't. I wasn't white, and I wasn't Palestinian, so what the hell was I? Pushed to the edge with frustration, I finally asked the cab driver why I didn't seem Palestinian. He told me, "The way you hold yourself very confidently, the way you talk to strangers, the way you make eye contact with me, the way you speak so loudly, this is not typical of a Palestinian girl. A traditionally defined Palestinian girl isn't loud, shouldn't make eye contact with strange men, doesn't talk to strangers, doesn't have short hair or tattoos. Not knowing that friendliness and a smile were unusual, I quickly learned that they were taken as sexual advances by many men. It was heartbreaking because I had to start suppressing who I was. Without realizing it, I started embracing the behavior of a quiet and inconspicuous Arab girl. In the streets, I would walk with an angry expression on my face, with my eyes on the ground. The gender norm in Arab society for a woman is that of a creature with no voice, no agency. She is inconspicuous and moves throughout the world as quietly as she can. She exists despite herself. It wasn't too long before I fell into this trap. Then the street harassment started to happen on a nearly daily basis. Because I had started to become this inconspicuous and quiet girl that society forced me into, I rarely reacted to the harassment. And pretty soon on, I plunged into depression. After enough time, I had had enough of it all. I missed who I used to be and the kindness that used to radiate from my heart. I missed being able to walk in the streets without being conscious about my body. A few months of my time in Palestine, International Women's Day rolled around. On that day, I donned a blue leather jacket painted with the words, "Nahir Habibti." In Arabic, the term Habibti translates into my dear, which implies ownership. In saying Nahir Habibti, I was reclaiming myself and reinforcing the notion that I am not owned by anyone else. And girls started messaging me immediately, asking where they could get their hands on a jacket. I knew that there was something here, a need to be met, an issue that needed to be addressed, a community to be built. If I was lonely because I couldn't talk to anyone about what I was going through, were there other women who were feeling the same way? How could I start a conversation about the things that were draining my world of color? How could I create a safe space not only to talk about the taboo issues, but to heal and grow from them? Enter Babyfist. In April of 2017, my startup Babyfist was launched to start making and selling these jackets to women all over the world. And from day one, I knew that this needed to be an endeavor that worked in a way that I could start talking about the things I was passionate about. This sent me down the path of social entrepreneurship, in which I wasn't making jackets and t-shirts, but rather shedding light on some really serious issues that we needed to start addressing. Every aspect of Babyfist is local and ethical. One of the most important things to me was being able to trace impact. Could I design a website that would allow a customer to understand where this jacket came from and how it was designed to address a social issue? So, Babyfist is a startup designed to give back in 4 ways. Firstly, because Gaza has been under siege for over a decade, its textile industry is only at 13% of what it once was. We have joined the effort to rebuild that industry, and we make our denim jackets there. Secondly, the jackets are embroidered in a women's co-op. Made of 25 women across 11 villages in the West Bank, this co-op features hardworking mothers and wives dedicating their free time to supporting their families. And after tending to her family, each woman will set aside 3 to 4 hours a day to embroider. And one jacket takes 3 days to complete. Investing in these women's skills not only helps them to support themselves, but allows for a sense of agency. Thirdly, 10% of our proceeds are donated to an organization called Palestinian Working Women's Society for Development. In their words, here is their mission. The Palestinian Working Women's Society for Development aims for gender equality and the eradication of all forms of discrimination against women through empowering and mobilizing their participation in the struggle against Israeli occupation, the contribution to development processes, the promotion of women's political, economic, and civil rights, and the expansion of women's access to justice through improving psychological well-being amongst women and girls, in combating gender-based violence. And finally, I wanted to create a community in which every Arab, no matter their religion, or location, or nationality, could find a system of support. Our photo shoots feature the people we always wanted to see growing up, ourselves. We celebrate the rainbow of Arab identity, the varieties of body types, the deconstruction of gender and beauty norms, so our models hail from all over the Arab world, and are men, women, and everyone in between. and our mission statement is, Baby Fist unearths the labyrinth of gender-based issues affecting Arab women throughout the world from a place of compassion and unconditional fond regard, with the conviction that deviating from the norm is to be celebrated. Naya Habibti is not just a phrase, it's a tangible community taking back the world that they live in. Launching Baby Fist was a means to shed light on the societal constructs dictating the lives of women. But then came time to ask why those constructs were in place. Gender-based discrimination and oppression is systemic. It's sociocultural. It's deeply entrenched in our history. But did that mean that it was synonymous with Arab culture? Was Arab and Palestinian identity inextricable from patriarchy? Is feminism an inherently Western idea forcing itself into the Arab world? And could I be a feminist and an Arab woman at the same time? So let's go back a few thousand years. In pre-Islamic times, a number of Arab tribes engaged in wahid, a practice in which female infants were buried alive immediately upon birth. In a few documented instances, they were buried alive at older ages. Later condemned and banned in the Quran, the practice originated as a means to ensure a family or tribe was not dishonored by the female member's actions. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Takwir, it states that the infant girls buried will be resurrected on Judgment Day and given a space before God to name those who wronged them, to share their stories, and thus free their souls to ascend into heaven. In this instance, it is the voice of a woman which frees her. So while this practice is long dead, it is still metaphorically practiced through the socioculturally constructed norms in which women's voices are belittled and oppressed. When I went to the police to report the man who sexually assaulted me in the street, he told me that I was amongst the few cases of sexual harassment and assault in Palestine. Flustered, I told him no, I'm amongst the few reported cases. We need to ask, why aren't women reporting their experiences? What social structures are in place to keep them from feeling like they can speak out, to name those who wrong them, to reclaim their agency? And one of the biggest reasons is sharaf, Arabic for honor. To preserve our honor, we've got to be good Arab girls. The good Arab girl is one who endlessly strives to minimize her own body significance. Her clothing is modest, her eyes constantly avoiding others, her voice soft, her laugh even stifled. She moves through the world invisibly so that her womanhood is preserved, thus maintaining the pristine and sacred family honor. And don't get me wrong, it's not that a woman can't or be or want modesty. It's that having those characteristics enforced upon her doesn't constitute freedom. A woman's love for herself, strength in nature, and control over her own are lost when societal standards define her purpose in the world before she's even born. Honor is so infused with an Arab identity, it makes up the entirety of our profanity. Let me show you what I mean. I curse all the time. And if we're being honest, there are definitely days that I would not kiss my mom with this mouth. I curse for some of the little things like spilling coffee on my laptop or nicking my knee when I'm shaving. And these cases usually elicit like a damn it or a shit. But then there are the more trying situations. And more often than not, it's a man catcalling me in the streets. And that's when I find myself screaming, I'm sorry. That's when I find myself screaming, oh translation, your mother's vagina. I know, but let me explain. For all of you women out there, I know you can identify with the feelings that erupt when men stare or say something profane, when all you want to do is get home from work, change into pajamas, and continue binge-watching Broad City. There is something deeply disturbing about the continuous feeling of violation and even danger. It takes just one too many harassers. Well, okay, one is one too many, but that's idealistic. It takes one too many to unleash weeks of pent-up anger and fear. And before you can even process what's happening, you're cursing his mother and sister. And shame immediately floods my chest after these words leave my mouth, making me want to look in the mirror and ask, why? Well, here's why. Honor plays a really critical role in the societal structure of the Arab world. It's inextricably coupled with the notion of modesty, both of which are used to reinforce a family's status of dignity. Now, here's the catch. That delicate relationship of modesty and honor rests solely between a woman's legs, specifically those of your mom and sister. So if you really want to insult someone, you've got to target their family honor, and thus the women of that family. Much of the foul list of Arabic profanity rests upon this framework. The misogynist profanity is nothing new. In fact, it's somewhat ubiquitous, being uttered on the sidewalks, the markets, in traffic, the list goes on. And while I speak both English and Arabic, the former is my mother tongue, and the language in which I think and understand more easily. So as I grew and absorbed Arabic, the Arabic I was hearing around me, these phrases were just words and sounds intended to offend someone. I never realized the meanings or sociocultural implications until much later on. And the realization was simultaneously vindicating and disturbing. I was now aware of the misogyny I had been enforcing, but would need much time to untangle it from my subconscious. So I was curious about how pervasive this was, and I walked into my office in Ramallah and asked everyone, to the embarrassment of my female coworkers, to give me a complete list of the insults involving women. And sure enough, the ones involving women induced much more reluctance from my coworkers than the insults I had nothing to do with mothers and sisters. They're as vulgar as it gets. And when the misogyny is so intricately contained within the very language of a people, then it rests deeply within the psyche of this people. It affects the way we perceive and act towards others without even being aware of it. And there are still days in which the phrases will spill from my mouth as reflex reactions, but at least I can catch myself and strive to kill the habit. And the nature of this profanity is a reminder that linguistic misogyny and misogyny in general is alive and thriving. The insults, as cringeworthy as they may be, aren't the real offense. It's that our society is still maintaining this restrictive and even oppressive conception that women are tools of misguided notions of honor. It's a conception that I'm tired of reinforcing every time I tell someone off. Unfortunately, rather than question this system of honor, we encourage women to avoid any scandal by allowing or following the rules of being a good Arab girl. The archetype of a good Arab girl is one which saturates and structures our society, culture, and even our legal systems in Palestine. The moment we are born onto this earth, our bodies as flesh and blood are no longer just that. Sorry. Instead, they're transformed into an abstraction. As our bodies are the vessels containing the family honor, our control over them is forfeited. And for the sake of honor, women's voices are stifled and their bodies made invisible. And any attack on a woman's body by a sex offender is actually her fault. That's not what I'm saying. It must mean that she has violated the societal norms in a way which invited the attack. Her clothing not modest enough, her eyes too friendly, her conversation too warm, and the fault is displaced from the attacker to the victim, only strengthening this skewed power dynamic. And this is where I started to ask, what are the effects of these societal norms on an individual? And I soon found out for myself. One afternoon in early October of 2017, I was sexually assaulted in the streets of my own city. It was a Friday afternoon, and the sun was shining, and my world was changed forever. A few weeks later, I was driving in the city, and I noticed a jasmine bush climbing up over one side of the fence and spilling over the other side. It was a picture I couldn't help but pull over and take. And I was taking my photo, and a man walked by and said something I didn't quite hear. I immediately assumed it was a sexual comment. I started yelling at him. Clearly confused, the man repeated what he had said. "Good morning." I flushed with embarrassment and apologized. I explained that a man had hurt me in the streets recently and that I was now suspicious of all men. He told me, "Put out your hands." So I put out my hands. And he pointed to each of my fingers and said, "Just as each of your fingers is different from the other, so are people." And he was right. When that man sexually assaulted me, I emerged a different woman. I became less trusting and viciously bitter. Not a day went by in which I didn't check the hands of every man walking by me to make sure his hands were safely away from his pants. I couldn't remember the last time I got into a taxi cab without leaving my finger on the call button of my phone, having already dialed 911. There were times in which a man passed me by on the street, and I immediately thought, I hate you. Intellectually, I was well aware that my harasser's actions did not represent the entire male species, but emotionally, I had tied all men together as predators while I remained the prey. I recognized the loss of my softness and my growing anger at the world, not only for what had happened to me, but for the vicious aspects of humanity that nothing can ever prepare you for. And although several weeks had passed since the incident, I remained suspicious and resentful. And in the meantime, I had tried everything to do what I thought was healing, but ended up being distraction. I went back to the gym, I photographed more, I journaled, I threw myself into my job, traveled, I ate more croissants. None of it worked because that's just the thing about distractions. They're only temporary. I started to depend on them until they became counterproductive. Suddenly, nothing was enough to make me smile, and I submitted to my depression. My motivation was lost, inspiration nowhere to be found, and my heart was really heavy. I cut out my friends and my family because when you close your heart to the world, you inevitably close it off to both the bad and the good. So I had to ask myself, how could I start my journey of healing? And how could I do it not only individually, but collectively? I have this theory that everyone you have met, everyone you will meet, is healing. We're all healing, dealing with some sort of difficulty which has affected us more than we want to admit. I believe that the mean-spirited never properly healed from something that happened to them. They were never given the safe space of unconditional fallen regard to start working through anything so that they could emerge stronger and yet still kind. With street harassment, sexual assault, and gender-based discrimination, I knew that I needed to deal with it properly so that I and every other Palestinian woman could go through life not having survived, but rather having thrived. I wanted to create a network of support, a family of women who would lift each other up in the midst of the issues that we were all terrified to speak about. Enter the Habibti typewriter project. This is an art project in which I take a typewriter to public areas, everything from sidewalks to coffee shops, and I collect people's stories of sexual harassment and gender-based discrimination and oppression. This genre falls into the genre of socially engaged art. Traditional genres include painting, sculpture, photography, installation. The art I create is socially engaged art, a genre that has newly emerged in the last 10 or 20 years. And it's an art medium that focuses on social engagement, inviting collaboration with individuals, communities, institutions in the creation of participatory art. And this genre holds the power to create a response among a group of people through the power of interaction. Isn't it a bit strange nowadays to break the isolation between strangers and interact with someone for a common cause or interest? Social interaction is the conduit for creating awareness and dialogue about issues pervading our societies. Art as social practice is an act of creative defiance, in that it challenges not only the definition of art, but also the structure of our society today. When the Habibti typewriter project made its first appearance at Clock Circle in Ramallah, it was met with hesitation by most of the women I asked to participate. On that day, on the sidewalk in the middle of the city, I asked 200 women to share their stories with me, and only 34 came forward. Those few stories were painful and intimate. And the surprise was that the girls who were telling me their stories were smiling, despite the pain in their eyes. And for the first time, someone wanted to know the secrets of suffering caused by the topic society had never acknowledged before now. For the first time, it wasn't a matter of religion, honor, or respectability to share a story. It was now a matter of the freedom to move about the world safely and confidently. Opening up to me and to each other, the girls started to talk about the way, in fact, they didn't move about the world with safety or with confidence. And they were tired of it. When a young woman experiences sexual harassment, or worse, the trauma rests deeply within her. It changes the way, sometimes forever, in which she carries herself, loves others, and moves through the rest of her life. Her eyes for the world are shaded in fear, bitterness, and distrust. And when no one wants to hear her story, when there's no way to work through and release that trauma, it only grows deeper and darker within her heart. Eventually, the Typewriter Project grew beyond collecting women's stories of sexual harassment and assault. I wanted to hear everyone's stories of gender-based discrimination and oppression. And as the project continued to make its way through the West Bank, it quickly transformed from a tool of expression to a tool of analysis. I was getting responses shedding light onto the ways societal constructs were being upheld and the ways that Palestinians were reacting against those norms. For instance, in Abu Dis, a small village on the edge of Jerusalem, I collected 3 stories about smoking over the course of 30 minutes. I felt uneasy at first, given my opinions about smoking, but as the second and third stories came in, I realized that there was something bigger at play here. The stories were short, 2 or 3 sentences long, and clearly illustrated the way society dictated gender rules of smoking, and what happened when men and women broke those rules. Simply put, men are supposed to smoke cigarettes, and women are supposed to smoke shisha. When a man smokes shisha, he's targeted and isolated as weak and feminine. When a woman smokes cigarettes, her reputation is stained with the rumors of loose morals and sexual misconduct. I started to look for more ways in which women were transgressing the norms, and I actually made a realization about myself. I have a lot of tattoos. And if we're being honest, I have some that should have been given a bit more thought at the time. I've got them on my arms, my hands, my back, my sides. I've gotten them in kitchens and tattoo parlors and everywhere in between. They're the ones designed to commemorate transformative moments in my life and ones that were simply pretty. But when I got my last tattoo just a few months ago, I got it because I needed to know that my body was mine, even if I didn't realize it at the time. I was walking down the street, my hands stuffed in my pockets and my mind racing with anger and sadness. And with no destination in my mind, my eyes were searching desperately for a place to pop into and retreat from the world. And just as I started making my way into my usual coffee shop, the sign hanging over my head stopped me in my tracks. Tattoo. So without a thought, I popped in and emerged an hour later with a new tattoo on my hand. One of the few spots in my body that could not be covered. And there was no hiding it now. I'm most definitely not a good Arab girl. My last tattoo was an impulsive decision, and it happened to come immediately after a particularly difficult conversation with myself about the ever-growing exclusivity of individuality and honor. When the needle started marking my skin that afternoon, it dawned on me that tattoos are my quiet rebellion against a life that's never been fully my own. They were a secret reclamation of agency over the body stolen from me because of my gender. In her writings, Jordanian activist Suhair Attal asks herself, why was I considered a bad girl? A tornado of feelings runs through me every time I face this question. A lot of anger, a bit of grief, sometimes sarcasm, and perhaps even secret joy. Her question is one that I ponder, along with these girls' stories of smoking, and my own story of tattooing. As frustrating as it can be to be deemed a bad girl for breaking the rules that shouldn't exist in the first place, there is satisfaction, actually, in defying expectations and carving a new identity for yourself outside of the norms. As small as it may be, at the root of Arab girl cigarette smoking or tattooing is a sense of control over one's own that has everything to do with shattering the gender norms. Just as there were women willing to share with me, though, there were women ready to criticize me. when something is so clearly an issue in the world, so inseparable from your daily experience as a woman, it comes as a rude awakening when you face people in denial of that all. Sexual and street harassment became a painful part of my reality, and I was growing more passionate about it with each new set of eyes I could feel on my body, with each chilling comment thrown at me, with each time I felt afraid of leaving the house. Sexual harassment is real, wrong, and rampant. A total no-brainer. Or so I thought. When I set out to get women's stories of street and sexual harassment via typewriter, I never imagined that I would get these responses. They struck me harder as more and more women gave me the same answers. And coming from my fellow women, the responses were sobering. This response is dangerous because of its implications. A woman who isn't deemed respectable according to standards of dress and behavior is somehow deserving of that street harassment. In other words, it's your fault. A second response I got was, I have never experienced street harassment. An overwhelming number of very young girls actually gave me this answer. And despite my surprise, I smiled and thanked them for taking the time to stop in the first place. But after a handful of these same responses came in, I decided to start digging a bit further. And instead of asking, have you ever experienced street or sexual harassment, I asked if anyone had ever made an inappropriate comment to them in the street. That's when they all said, oh, that? Definitely. But does that count? Translation. Street harassment is so common that women have normalized it. It takes an extreme case, assault or rape, to become an issue worth talking about. And it's heartbreaking to know that harassment is so common that young women aren't even aware of it anymore. The third answer I got is we need to end occupation before dealing with women's rights. We have been occupied for 70 years. Why do we keep waiting for occupation to end before tending to serious sociocultural issues? Because we've waited for so long, using occupation as the rug under which we brush all of our issues, we've let generations of women pass us by who have dealt with gender-based discrimination and oppression. I don't want another day to pass in which women have to suffer because we're terrified to disrupt the power structure and shatter the fragile male ego upon which our society is built. And these are my exact words at a panel discussion about 2 weeks ago. There were 3 women on this panel besides me. One Iranian woman, one Brazilian woman, and another Palestinian woman. I knew the other Palestinian and I had differing views, so I was curious to see how our conversation would go. 2 women hailing from the same place, yet holding very different opinions, I thought it would be very interesting. And what I wasn't expecting, however, was for her to tell me in front of everyone, you're not Palestinian. And the confusion of my high school years just came rushing back. And it came with pain this time. But this time, I didn't stay silent, because Palestinian identity isn't exclusive, and I was tired of having people define it as such. It's not a competition, and a person is most definitely not less Palestinian for not putting occupation at the forefront of his or her life. In Palestine, 1 in 5 girls marries before her 18th birthday. In 43% of marriages that were registered in 2014, the brides were younger than 19. In 2014, 670 brides were younger than 14. In 2014, there were 27 cases of honor killing of women and girls. There were 15 in 2015, and 18 from the beginning of 2016 to mid-August. Palestinian legislation allows protection of honor for such crimes, which means that perpetrators get a reduced sentence or don't even get convicted. Palestine's legal system is broken, and it's burying women's voices. Yes, we are occupied, and the occupation is significantly hindering Palestine's legal, economic, and social development. But there are also major players in Palestine taking advantage of occupation to impede social development. The gender politics in any part of the world, And gender politics in Palestine are skewed to benefit a particular group of people. And no matter where you are in the world, empowerment of women is inherently political, in that it threatens to dismantle the power dynamic in which men are the change makers. The occupation does not exonerate the state of Palestine from its due human rights obligation to prevent, investigate, and punish and provide remedies for acts of gender-based violence. If we want to empower women in Palestine, we have to be ready to criticize our own government and our own society. And that criticism doesn't mean that I don't want Palestine to exist, or that occupation doesn't matter, or that somehow Palestinians don't deserve freedom. No. It means that I want a free state and a society within that state in which every member has equal access to opportunity and happiness. Now, I do encounter those who unfortunately actually defend and uphold the patriarchy. And those types of mentalities stem from a post-colonial fear of the West, which manifests itself in maintaining a distinct identity in an effort to secure some stable collective psyche as Arabs. Those people end up almost reaffirming the stereotypes for Arabs which the world has given them in order to distinguish themselves from the toxic and corrupt West. My work revolves around dispelling that notion and to reinforce the idea that Arab identity doesn't have to be synonymous with patriarchy. If we dismantle the patriarchy, Arab society will still exist and will still be distinct from the West. We just have to know which parts of society to maintain for the sake of vibrancy and which to dismantle for the sake of social justice. When speaking to different groups of women, I actually have to decide if I'm going to use the phrase women's empowerment or dismantling the patriarchy, because the latter is an incredibly sensitive subject for women in Palestine. To dismantle the patriarchy can mean dismantling their culture and upbringing as they know it. And that can be a really scary thing. I don't want to cause psychological distress or discomfort or fear, because it means that they can reject the feminist movement altogether. So I have to figure out a way to approach it from the perspective of empowering women to a place of equality with their male counterparts. And this is something that most women want to get behind. Palestinian women have been used as vessels of tradition in the face of occupation. When occupation robs you of identity, we have to hold on and strengthen our culture and traditions to maintain a sense of identity and stability. But that can also be really dangerous. Somehow, it's decided that men are symbols of modernity, while women are relegated to that of tradition. And there's nothing wrong with tradition, but it becomes an issue when it's used as a tool to enslave women to limited ways of thinking regarding their own rights. We've conflated tradition with gender-based discrimination, and it's crippling what used to be a really vibrant culture. Palestinian culture is this. Traveling from city to city, you're led through mountains and hills, painted in long green grasses, and dotted with crimson poppy flowers. Our traditional homes are decaying with majesty. Our culture is calligraphy and poetic language, feiruz and kanafeh. Our people are friendly, treating one another like neighbors, and even like family. Here in Palestine, our flowers start blooming in the winter, despite the harsh cold. And I think that speaks to the nature of our resilience and our persistence to offer beauty to one another and to the world. This is the Palestine that I want to defend and show the world. Now I work to unearth and defend Arab and Palestinian culture, which tolerates and celebrates gender equality. I want to create a space in which women are equal and celebrated participants, and to show the world that this is really what Arab culture can and should be, despite what the media tells us. Why should I have to choose between my feminism and my Arab identity? I should be able to love my body without the slut-shaming, to dismiss oppressive notions of honor because I believe in individual freedom, and to want equal opportunities for both men and women in Palestine without being seen as a traitor. I knew that I was a feminist and that I was also a Palestinian woman, and I had to start asking myself, why did those seem like two mutually exclusive things? And I learned that they really aren't. Palestinian culture, the Arab world, and Islam can coexist peacefully with feminism. Islam has even been reinterpreted as a feminist reading. And all of this is true. We just happen to live in a world cruelly interpreting Arab and Muslim identity as an inherently patriarchal one. And knowing and understanding this helped me to finally reconcile my feminism and my Palestinian identity. This is where I like to use the phrase shades of feminism, which speaks to the variety of feminisms which exist, and rightfully so, all over the world. There is no one-size-fits-all feminism. What works for Palestinian women is different for Palestinian American women, and there's white feminism, Arab feminism, Islamic feminism, Christian Arab feminism, etc. Every culture has, or should have, its own feminism in which, within that particular sociocultural context, women are inherently free and gender equality is practiced and celebrated. And this is why I have a love-hate relationship with the Me Too movement. The fact that it was catalyzed in Hollywood by white women, even though it was founded 12 years ago by Tarana Burke, it finally paints sexual harassment and gender-based discrimination as an international issue rather than something inherently Arab. For the first time, the fight for gender equality isn't in the history books of white culture, but it's on the forefront of international issues today. And for the first time, women are rallying behind their respective movements and uniting to illustrate that gender-based issues exist all over. It's okay to compare the Me Too movement and the Not Your Habibti movement for the sake of seeing what's similar and what's different. It's not okay to say, and many people who have covered the movement have said this, it's not okay to say that Not Your Habibti is the Arab Me Too, because the West has got to stop forcing itself into the center of every dialogue. The feminisms which evolved in the US, Europe, Christianity, and Judaism are somehow seen as internal and indigenous. Yet, somehow, the feminism in the Arab world and in Islam are discredited as Western influenced. So I recently read a book, write this down if you haven't read already. It's called Bad Girls in the Arab World. A book which felt like it was written for me, especially when I stumbled upon it in a tiny shop in North Carolina. At the risk of sounding cliche, the book changed my life. Cliche? Yes. True? Absolutely. This was one of those books in which every other line makes you go, yes, and you like grab a pen to write it down because you don't want to forget it. And there's one line in particular that perfectly captures everything I am as a feminist. There's one line that perfectly captures everything I am as a feminist Arab woman, and that's not an oxymoron. While the bad girl fights injustice tooth and nail, her narratives also operate as powerful reminders of the consequences of such bold transgressions. It looks like there are no positive outcomes to their quests. So in reading the line, I really wanted to be proud because I knew it was written for the likes of me. But it didn't last long before I felt a sadness sort of come over me. Because it's true. To be an Arab girl who lives beyond the norms and shatters the stereotypes and fights injustice means that you will live a difficult life. Let me explain. The trope of a bad Arab girl is not a new one in the Arab world. In fact, it's millennia old, but that's a different story. For me, the threat of being dubbed a bad girl penetrated my life with fear, weighing me down with shame whenever I made what I thought were mistakes. I grew up with severe warnings to stay away from this girl or that girl so I wouldn't end up like them. Those girls became scandalous enigmas with reputations they probably didn't even deserve. And although I had never spoken to them, I was in awe, but more so afraid. I didn't want to end up like the bad girls that everyone in the Arab community was talking about. When I made my move to work and live in Palestine, I never imagined that I would have to choose between my nationalism and my feminism. As the woman who advocates for gender equality, I'm forced to choose between being a feminist and being a Palestinian, in a state which allows for domestic violence in the name of gender roles and murder in the name of honor. The more I embrace the beliefs which I stand by and the values which I fight for, the more I distance myself from the possibility of being a good Arab girl. And for that I'm called unrespectable, dishonorable, corrupt, and just plain lost. So last week, I was picking up my 8-year-old sister from school. And she was held back a few minutes in class, so I was waiting for her alone outside amongst like crowds of energetic, crazy kids. And while I was waiting, this young girl approached me And she really stood out immediately from the other young girls who were running around because her hair was cropped really short. And although she was in school uniform, she'd added a few personal touches by wearing floral rain boots and like an orange Joker's like neon. And she asked me, "Are you Yasmeen? You fight street harassment, right?" I told her, "Yes, I am." And she responded, "I think you're really brave to do what you do." And I crouched down and I asked her how old she was. When she said 10, I asked her if she'd ever experienced harassment. She told me yes, and that often, in addition, in the streets, other Palestinians will call her foreign because of her short hair and pale skin. I felt this girl in so many ways because I was this girl, confused about who she was, lost because she didn't fit in, and pained because of the cruelty of harassment. Why has the world been divided into two opposing halves? Arab women have been shown two ways of living: the post-colonial Western feminism and the traditional patriarchy of the Arab world. And somehow we're just supposed to choose one. So where does this leave Arab women? If a girl of the Arab world is to transgress the Arab norms, she's immediately dubbed a bad girl. And in defying the Arab standards, she has to also be wary of not falling back to post-colonial European standards of feminism, so as not to fall victim to yet another sociocultural construct. And better than strict dichotomies, she's supposed to occupy the terribly confusing space in between, a space which divides characterization and is thus inherently without any sense of identity, purpose, or self. But what if the space in between wasn't so fuzzy and wasn't marginalized? What if we carved a space for women to forge their own paths and definitions of feminism? And what if we not only tolerated but celebrated those deviating from the norm, those brave enough to question the norm and ask if maybe, just maybe, there's a better way? What if our definitions of Arab or American or Palestinian were more inclusive of diversity so that no one else has to ever feel that they do not belong? It is only through expression that social change will occur, agency reclaimed, and personal freedom gained. There is solace in the collective voice which rings with the survival of brutality, isolation, and incrimination. In my work, I have created a community. Because of this community, I stand with more love for myself than I could have ever imagined. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like the fuck up. And my hunger for my rights as an Arab woman doesn't make me feel alone or lost. And scattered all over, we are coming out of the shadows and into the light as a family ready to take back our own.
Thank you so much. And then just a couple of things. We're also a coalition for Resolve Palestine, I forgot to mention in the beginning. And I want to thank COSO for sponsoring us and getting Yasmeen here. It was awesome. And then some heavy topics were mentioned today throughout this talk. So if you need any resources, check out WISE, SAPA's, and MAVs, and website link. And then yeah, we're going to open up for Q&A now if you have to go. Q&A will last until 6:30, but just feel free to slip out.
We'll do 2 minutes, if you need to leave, go ahead and do that, then it's all chaos. And then we'll open up for questions.
that's traffic.
No, don't turn it off if they're on from here. Is the green light on? Okay, just talk really loud.
What are the difficulties that you've encountered, like trying to establish and grow your business in occupied Palestine?
So Palestinians actually are legally allowed to produce and export to the rest of the world. One of the biggest obstacles is figuring out how can I make a product that I want to sell abroad. Thankfully, I'm still a startup and I'm not considered a company, and so there's that loophole. But it's really difficult because as a result, shipping is incredibly expensive, and for a startup with limited funds, that can present a really huge obstacle when you can't get your product out to market, right, and keep you afloat. But I think even more difficult than that is working in Gaza. It's not easy. For those of you who don't know, Gaza has been, like I said, under siege for over 10 years. Not even the humans living within Gaza can leave Gaza. And people within the West Bank, tourists from all over, no one is allowed to enter. It's very much a very strict order for only NGOs and occasionally the press. And so as a result of this, working with Gaza to produce these jackets, like Sumner's wearing, it takes months. So while someone wants to say, okay, this product's coming out in February, that's not going to happen. If you're making a product any other place in the world, you can definitely expect that there'll be a small margin of delay, but working with Gaza means it's like months of delay. So it's a matter of getting a product out on time, which never happens, and being patient enough, and building a support system of customers who are also understanding enough to be like, okay, I want this jacket, but I'm willing to wait 3 months because I believe in what you believe, and I want this product, and I want to support and give back to the community which has created it. So it's definitely an obstacle working with Gaza as a very oppressed state, but it's something I'm more than happy to continue doing.
Yes, I think I saw with the purple shirt.
Are you doing anything to also educate the men in this? Because I'm from Israel and I have Palestinian friends, and I have a friend that when we want to go out at night, we have to go out before 7 o'clock because after 7 o'clock her dad doesn't let her out of the house. Or my friend who's engaged, we have to go out because her dad doesn't let his fiance out of the house after 9 o'clock at night. And he thinks that's the norm, and he doesn't understand why I don't think that's normal. But I'm wondering if there's any kind of education to talk to the men or the women who believe in the patriarchy of letting them.
That's a really good question, and that's why when I initially started the project, I only wanted to talk to women. And as the typewriter project grew and continued moving throughout the West Bank, I did start including men because I wanted them to feel like, okay, first of all, you have a right to speak, you have a right to participate in your society, but also that if I share these stories with you, maybe you'll start to see a different way of thinking, a different way of living. And so now I'm inclusive of men in all of my projects. And there are definitely women too who, like you said, uphold this idea, this norm. A lot of women will defend it and say I'm some crazy American girl trying to force her values on them. And with them, I usually I talk them through it. I don't do it in this patronizing way, but rather I like to talk in a way in which I give them the tools, the questions that I have, and they can answer them on their own, and hopefully through not only my own word, but through the evidence of countless stories that I've collected, start to understand that maybe there's an issue here, and that while it might be scary to address or acknowledge the issues, it's important that we finally do, and that it's not impossible to not only focus on occupation, that if you choose to focus on women's rights issues or like environmental issues or any sort of issue, that we can still also have this the struggle for a free state. So a lot of my work just sort of is understanding, okay, what do they think and how can I start talking to them in a way that doesn't scare them off or shut them off, but in a way that they want to talk to me and maybe reach a point of, okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Next question.
Yeah, I was curious about the choice of leave for the company and why you were
I get this question a lot, and I want to give you this like really inspirational answer, and it's not that. Like one time I was in a hotel room with my friends, and like one of my friends was like yawning and making this cute little like baby fist, like, oh, I like your baby fist. And then as soon as I said it, I was just like, oh my god, that's it. I mean, like ran and like registered it immediately. That's the whole story. And then just I think I like applied this like meaning of like. It's the divide you, like afterwards, so it seemed like I had my shit together. That's
question. Over there. Why did you decide to use a typewriter?
So that's a good question. When I first did this project, it debuted like literally on the sidewalk in the center of Ramallah, in the busiest like circle of the city. And I know that if I had a table with a laptop or a notebook, people aren't as likely to stop as when you have a typewriter. Because the only time Palestinians ever see a typewriter, and the majority of them don't even see, but Palestinians without Palestinian passports, mostly, will only see a typewriter in one office, which is the permit office. If you want to leave Palestine, you have to apply for a permit and pay tax, and then you can leave Palestine. Also, if you want to enter Israel, you have to apply for a permit. Those are typed up on typewriters. And so I think when you see this machine that is so symbolic of one thing, but you see it like out in the public, and this weird girl is sitting behind it, you're curious and you want to talk to her. And also like Sheridan and Sumner mentioned, it is symbolic of you're taking this machine, which is somehow typing up these permissions for people to move freely within a territory. And I wanted to sort of reclaim it in a way that people, once you share your story with me, you're beginning this journey of healing, right? You're freeing yourself. And I wanted to type up these permissions via story to start your personal journey of movement and freedom. That's why. And it's fun.
Next question in the back.
You were talking about how different cultures have different feminisms, and like one feminism you mentioned was white feminism, which is like something that I've always thought of with like a negative connotation because it's kind of like it's exclusive to like so many other like intersectional identities. And so I was wondering like how you see feminism as something that like different identities can have and like be separate, but also like how they could still maybe come together.
Like in a way that
is like supportive of all women?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't know that I have a really great answer for it, but I do know that I know that feminism isn't something inherently Western or American or European or anything like this. And the way I try and define it so that it is sort of a universal concept that changes according to that particular culture or country or people is that at the basis of it, it is not that gender equality is tolerated but celebrated, and that women and men have agency. Agency is, for me, the most key thing for feminism, which obviously, as we all know, hopefully, that it's not, feminism isn't about female empowerment, it's about gender equality. And so for me, it's agency. It's agency both for women and for men as well, to be free to make their own choices outside of norms, outside of constructs, and to have equal opportunity or equal access to opportunity and happiness. But then that's like the basis, and everything else that comes out of that is going to be so different depending on whether it's in the United States and groups within the United States and Indonesia and Egypt. And it's a good answer, and I probably didn't give you such a great answer, but that's where I like to think of it.
this may be a big question, but I'm looking for just like a little advice on how you think we can combat harassment on the college campus. Because I know last week for sexual assault awareness month, we did like a week of action, and on Friday night it was a night of solidarity where all the Greek houses were closed, and it was kind of a controversial move because people were wondering if that was really the right action to take. So if you have any advice on how we could
Yeah, Sumner and Sheridan did tell me about this night of solidarity, and I can imagine that if I was someone that wasn't, I guess, understanding of the situation, I could almost be like pissed, like as if there's some sort of like blame being displaced on someone, or like you're taking away my night, or something like this. And I feel like no matter what the situation, you're always going to have someone who's upset, but that's besides the point. There's no really like one answer. I think, for example, workshops in which you work with both men and women to sort of really start a dialogue about this. I mean, something like a night of solidarity could be interesting in terms of a symbolic aspect, but if people aren't coming together to talk about, okay, what's going on and why, then maybe it's not as effective as it could be. One of the reasons that I like what I do is that when you share these stories and you put them in a very public space, not only are you encouraging people to speak up and share these issues, but also you're allowing their peers to like in on something that is very intimate, very painful, yet very necessary to share. And I think when you open up individually and collectively, then you feel collectively and you want to change collectively. And I think rather than sort of doing these symbolic moves or maybe restricting it to like, I'm not sure, like a group or something, a club, it's something that maybe is more public and in a very public space that at some point everyone will sort of cross paths with it. And maybe it'll change, maybe it won't, but at least it's in the public space and it's forced itself into the dialogue.
Next question?
So obviously when you're collecting these stories, it probably takes, I imagine, like an emotional toll. And so I'm sort of wondering how, because I think a lot of sort of gender work going on campus can be like taxing. But how do you sort of like, I guess, keep going and not burn out? Like what sort of strategies do you employ?
That's an interesting question, because actually my fear when I first started was, am I going to grow numb to hearing all, like I was worried that I would grow numb after hearing so many stories. But it's the stories themselves that keep me going. When I do my typewriter project, oftentimes a girl will sit with me and she'll tell me her story, and some of them are like short and even funny, and they'll move on and forget about me. Sometimes they'll sit down and they'll tell me their story and they start crying with me. And they'll tell me, this is the first time I've cried since it happened. And they don't know me. And they're like this weird girl sitting in a very public space where they're crying. And for me, seeing that they've just taken a really critical step towards emotional healing, and that I was allowed to be part of that, is the motivation that I can't explain or describe, but it's all the motivation I need to keep doing. I could do what I do all day, every day. Especially when it's something that is forever changed my life. It's almost like this obsessive thing to want to keep hearing about it and learning about it. Every story I take gives me a different tool of analysis, like the smoking or the tattooing. I'm growing to understand myself more, understand the people around me more, my culture, the world. I feel like they're continuing to hear these stories, not only like a very emotional thing for me and for the people around me, but also a really incredibly helpful thing of insight. So that's my answer.
Here.
Is this your first time doing a project to the United States, and do you think that there's going to be differences in how Americans will respond versus internationally?
That's a good question. Yeah, so it's my first time in the U.S. Actually, last week I was in Italy, and I took this project there, and it performed twice in two very different spaces. And actually, if I gave everyone in the audience right now one of the stories from that trip and asked you to pin it on the map, I don't think you could. It is wild for me to have seen this typewriter go from Palestine to Italy, which in your mind, at least for me, were like two radically different things, and then hear the same stories, even down to the killing. Even down to the killing. Blew my mind. In Italy, apparently, very jealous boyfriends are murderers. So, that story you could pin on either of the two. And so when I came, that really gave me an idea of, okay, maybe these stories in the US won't be so different. And I haven't done the typewriter project yet, as you know, it's tomorrow. But I'm thinking it will be along those same lines of these experiences totally transcend like nationality and race, and will be sort of universal.
Professor.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed your talk and also the reference to Nadia Yaqub and Hiba Awas as bad girls. And I really like the kind of very sophisticated kind of separation between the kind of activism you're doing and also the activism for Palestine that imagines that somehow the individual has to disappear for the nation to be restored.
Right.
So this kind of, opposite, this kind of exclusivity, either you're for Palestine or you're for the individual.
Right.
So I was wondering how, now coming to the US, so it's kind of piggybacking on the previous question, do you think how our activists, Palestinian activists or activists for Palestine here are responding to this kind of argument, which we don't always hear in those kind of clear, sophisticated, well-articulated terms?
How will American, well, first of all, thank you, but so the question is, how will American activists respond to this idea of different activism within Palestine? Yeah, I think that, honestly, I hope that activists here can identify with it. It's my first time back in the US in quite some time, but I've been keeping up with the news with this recent gun violence pandemonium, and for me, it was so similar to what I was hearing in Palestine. It was like, if you want gun control, you're not American. And for some reason, it was like, and it's obviously very different. Like, it's not an individual over a nation, but it is this idea of sort of becoming a traitor when you don't put something else that benefits everyone, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not really about gun control, it's about the Constitution, and that's like a really scary thing when your entire nation is founded on that and someone wants to alter it. And that's similar in Palestine, and so I hope activists, again, I can't speak for all activists, but I hope that they respond in a way that comes with empathy, and that they can understand that it's a really fragile situation. I mean, there's a lot of human heart and fear at the root of this conflict between the self and the collective. But also in the United States, I think it's a very individualized society versus much of the rest of the world, which isn't individualized. And so, yeah, it depends. I can't speak for all activists, but I hope that sort of answered your question.
Dan.
So you spoke about how you are opposed to using the struggle against the occupation, the struggle against Israel as a colonizer, to place that before the struggle for female empowerment and feminism and women's rights, etc. And I mean, it's not my thing to have a position on, but I agree. At the same time, do you see anything possible with using the struggle for female empowerment, specifically in Palestine, as a sort of a wheels turning method for anti-occupation stuff? Like, do you see similar materials to work with?
Yeah, completely, actually. And I wish more people would see this. It's most people who argue with me about this and say that, first of all, a lot of women in Palestine have told me you have this misconception of what Palestinian women are. Like, they name like 3 major female activists during the intifadas, and then they're like, And I'm like, okay, that's 3. What about the rest who were at home? And what about what happened after that? The daily lives of these women. I think what happens is when you move women out of these norms and into active and equal participants of society, that only gives you more hands on deck to fight occupation, if anything. And I don't see why we can't do it at the same time, because, for example, the woman that told me I wasn't Palestinian because I didn't put occupation first was a DJ. So I was like, you're not either. And so there's this idea that somehow all your energy has to go, I don't know. It's completely possible to achieve a free state while also addressing things like all of the social issues, social justice issues. Yeah, and so I think, just to answer your question, yes, I think that empowering women to a place of equality to men will only, if anything, accelerate the process. Because one of the biggest tools that Israel is often accused of pink washing, right? They'll say that Arabs or the Palestinians are barbarian oppressors of women, and therefore they somehow deserve to be occupied. And while that's not a valid argument, at the same time we're only giving them enough fuel, right, to make that argument. So when you empower the women of society, you're giving them less to paint you in a bad way to the rest of the world. And it's just, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like you're doing a really good job of being able to balance the issues in your community and then also present them to outside the community without compromising, I think. And I was wondering, how do you balance, I'm assuming you receive a lot of backlash from people within your community, Palestinian American and in Palestine. So how do you deal with those kinds of haters, I guess, and how do you respond? Do you even choose to engage with them, or do you have arguments, or how do you deal with the attacks from within?
That's a really good question, and I wish I had some examples for you, but most of the people that will try and speak to me about these issues come on Instagram, they'll DM me, right? And I never not respond, first of all, because again, it seems hypocritical for me to say that I've created a safe space for everyone to contribute, and then I don't let some people come and talk to me. And I've never argued with anyone. I always speak in a way with them in which I definitely allow for a back and forth. For example, I never send paragraphs long. I give point by point, and it's back and forth and it's always kind, and I hope diplomatic. And I've never had anyone end a conversation with me on Instagram, and I hope not. I hope they have never hated me. I've been thanked for talking so slowly with them. And sometimes we'll agree to disagree, and a lot of times they're like, oh my god, well, first of all, thank you for talking to me, and second of all, I never saw it that way. And that's my biggest thing, is I wanted to create a really safe space for anyone to come forward, and sometimes people will start off really harsh and really mean, they're like, you're for saying this. And then they're almost ashamed, because by the end of it, they're like, oh, you're actually really great. And you're and so I was kind of showing them, okay, I'm actually, kindness is love. Kindness and empathy is also a tool, and it's not you should never just throw what you think on someone and then demonize them for thinking differently. It's no, we have different opinions, let's talk it out. And so that's always my policy when it comes to whether I'm on Instagram or on the streets with my typewriter. I always talk to everyone.
I was just wondering, well, first of all, I think your platform is really brilliant, but also, I was wondering, what do you do with the transcripts? In terms of so tomorrow when you're collecting them in Collis, will people be able to see them, or
Yeah, I wish I could, actually. Oh, okay, this is my website, and this is how I display. So this is a coffin. These are the coffins which actually went to Italy with me last week. And in the coffins are all the letters that I've collected since October when I first launched this project. And people are allowed to go in and encouraged to read one or all of them, wherever you feel. And so they're collected for this exhibition. I don't collect names, they're always anonymous. But the idea is that people all over the world can read these stories in this like really unique way. I don't have a copy with me, so you won't see it tomorrow. But once I leave here and leave the US, the letters will go into this coffin, which will then go to an exhibition in Poland, Berlin, New York, and Ramallah.
And then just like nuance that, Dartmouth stores specifically are going to be scanned, so although you won't have your copy, Sharon and I will have scans of them. And the hope is to eventually do a gallery exposition of these stories, in addition collectively to the other 6 schools that are also participating in this project. So we're hoping to like continue this dialogue, the conversation, story sharing at our campus afterwards. I think we have time for like 2 more questions.
I was just wondering, you said that you used kind of like local people to make the shirts and the other clothes, and I'm just wondering, how did you come to the decision to maybe charge a little more for like the t-shirts and the jackets instead of being able to maybe sell like 4, 5, 10 times as many if you made them in like some random factory somewhere? And like how do you basically reconcile like supporting a local economy versus spreading your message maybe to a wider base?
Oh. That's a good question. Yeah, when I first started, everyone was like, go to Turkey, because apparently Turkey's like the #1 fabric producer in the world. Or everyone was like, you're an idiot, go to China, you could get this fabric at a fraction of the price. And that just didn't feel right to me, and especially when now, I don't know, I hope everyone knows, the last like week and a half, 2 weeks, Gaza has been experiencing literal hell on earth. And even then, we're like, you should pull out, like, it's gonna be, like, it's not gonna exist anymore, why are you even bothering to support it? And that just feels like, why are we abandoning this place on the planet? It almost feels like, I would really feel like a traitor, like, I said like a lot. This is something I believe in. I believe in this right to exist, and I have seen, we've all seen the way that investing in China or investing in Turkey has robbed people of their well-being and of their stability, and I want nothing more than to give back, even if it's only the small amount that I do. I still want to give back to those people. Seeing the women that I talk to who embroider the jackets, knowing that I'm literally their bread and butter, that if they wanted to leave their husbands, if they ever had to support themselves, they could. That for me is so much more important than making 10 times more t-shirts for some random person in like Oregon. And so while I would like more people to know about the message, because it is an important message for me, supporting the local economy is more important because that was the reason I set out in the first place.
Last question.
Yeah, I was just wondering at the start, I know that you mentioned like when you didn't really know your identity and you're kind of struggling with that, there's some like tension between you and your family. So just wondering like how is it now? And like if you have any family like in Palestine, like how do they feel, like any extended family, how do they feel about that? They feel like, as an Arab as well, I feel like, there's always tension when it comes to this.
Right, yeah. I'm lucky to have a very supportive mother. She has taken on my dream and my vision like it's her own. She shares like every Facebook post. And I'm also lucky to have amazing siblings. I have 6 siblings, and every single one does what they can. Carry the typewriter for me, and share on Facebook, and wears my t-shirts, and that's really amazing. Unfortunately, my father and I don't speak, and that is a very, that's a shortcoming on my own. It's easy to talk to you guys about empathy and healing when I'm still holding on to the pain of the past, and I refuse to talk to someone in my own life who, if anything, I should thank for pushing me onto this journey, right? So that's the situation now, and it's one that I'm working to resolve, and it could take a month, and it could take 10 years, and that's a very difficult thing. It's also informing my work in a lot of ways. So I don't think the tension ever goes away. Like, I have all these women, always women, reaching out to me on Instagram, like, hi, I wear a hijab, but I don't want to. How can I remove it without losing my family? Or I married a man, I want to marry a man that I love, and I can't because and I don't have a solution, unfortunately. There's always a decision that you have to make in which you choose the lesser of two evils. And it seems like the tension never really goes away. It's a matter of how you learn to live with it and how you choose to let it affect you as well. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for coming today.